Hello, everybody. It is the Desert Viking, and today we will be stepping into the Kabbalion and the fifth Hermetic principle, which talks about rhythm. This channel is created to discuss esoteric wisdoms, knowledge, teachings from my perspective only. I am an esoteric Freemason. I do not speak for all Freemasons. I do not speak for all esoteric Freemasons. Everything that I discuss on this channel is my opinion alone. It's important to keep that in mind. Additionally, I am not a guru. I do not have all the answers. I am stepping through the Kabbalion with you all because Hermetic philosophy is one of my cornerstones. And I often get asked the question, where do we even start with trying to learn about esotericism? There are so many places where we could begin. Where do we start? And for me, short of meditation, the Hermetic philosophy is the cornerstone of everything. It's the root of almost every piece of esoteric thread that you encounter. You could trace it all the way up to one of those philosophies. So that is why I've chosen to start this with the Kabbalion. You can obtain the Kabbalion off of Amazon.com. This book was written in 1908. This book essentially distills the principles of Hermetic philosophy and is a great first read into Hermetic philosophy if you're so inclined. Now, all that being said, we are moving into chapter 11 of the Kabbalion, which deals with the fifth Hermetic principle, which is on rhythm. So let's hear what the Kabbalion has to say. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. The great fifth Hermetic principle, the principle of rhythm, embodies the truth that in everything there is manifested a measured motion, a to and from movement, a flow and inflow, a swing forward and backward, a pendulum-like movement, a tide-like ebb and flow, a high tide and a low tide, between the two poles manifest on the physical, mental, or spiritual planes. The principle of rhythm is closely connected with the principles of polarity described in the preceding chapter, the fourth Hermetic principle. Rhythm manifests between the two poles established by the principle of polarity. And remember, the principle of polarity just establishes that there is no one thing, there are just degrees of separation between its two extremes, such as hot and cold, love and hate, etc. This does not mean, however, that the pendulum of rhythm swings to the extreme poles, for this rarely happens. In fact, it is difficult to establish the extreme polar opposites in the majority of cases. But the swing is ever toward, first one pole and then the other. There is always an action and a reaction, an advance and a retreat, a rising and a sinking, manifested in all of the airs and phenomena of the universe. Suns, worlds, men, animals, plants, minerals, forces, energy, mind, matter, yes, even spirit, manifests this principle. The principle manifests in the creation and the destruction of worlds, in the rise and fall of nations, in the life history of all things, and finally, in the mental states of man. Beginning with the manifestation of spirit, of the all, it will be noticed that there is ever the outpouring and the indrawing, the outbreathing and inbreathing of Brahm, as the Brahmins word it. Universes are created, reach their extreme low point of materiality, and then begin in their upward swing. Suns spring into being, and then at the height of their power being reached, the process of retrogression begins, and after eons, they become dead masses of matter, awaiting another impulse which starts again their inner energy into activity, and a new solar life cycle has begun. And thus it is with all the worlds. They are born, grow, and die, only to be reborn. And thus it is with all the things of shape and form. They swing from action to reaction, from birth to death, from activity to inactivity, and then back again. Thus it is with all living things. They are born, they grow, and they die, and then they are reborn. So it is all with all great movements, philosophies, creeds, fashions, governments, nations, and all else: birth, growth, maturity, decadence, death, and then new birth. The swing of the pendulum is ever in evidence. Night follows the day, and then day, night. The pendulum swings from summer to winter and then back again. The corpuscles, atoms, molecules, and all masses of matter swing around the circle of their nature. There is no such thing as absolute rest or cessation from movement, and all movement partakes of rhythm. The principle is of universal application. It may be applied to any question or phenomena of any of the many planes of life. It may be applied to all phases of human activity. There is always the rhythmic swing from one pole to the other. The universal pendulum is ever in motion. The tides of life flow in and out according to law. The principle of rhythm is well understood by modern science and is considered a universal law as applied to material things. But the Hermeticists carry the principle much further and know that its manifestations and influence extend to the mental activities of man, and that it accounts for the bewildering succession of moods, feelings, and other annoying and perplexing changes that we notice in ourselves. But the Hermeticists, by studying the operations of this principle, have learned to escape some of its activities by transmutation. The Hermetic masters long since discovered that while the principle of rhythm was invariable and ever in evidence in mental phenomena, still there were two planes of its manifestation, so far as mental phenomena are concerned. They discovered that there were two general planes of consciousness, the lower and the higher, the understanding of which fact enabled them to rise to the higher plane and thus escape the swing of the rhythmic pendulum which manifested on the lower plane. In other words, the swing of the pendulum occurred on the unconscious plane, and the consciousness was not affected. This they call the law of neutralization. Its operations consist in the raising of the ego above the vibrations of the unconscious plane of mental activity so that the negative swing of the pendulum is not manifested in consciousness, and therefore they are not affected. It is akin to rising above a thing and letting it pass beneath you. The Hermetic master or advanced student polarizes himself at the desired pole, and by a process akin to refusing to participate in the backward swing, or if you prefer, a denial of its influence over him, he stands firm in his polarized position and allows the mental pendulum to swing back along the unconscious plane. All individuals who have attained any degree of self-mastery accomplish this, more or less unknowingly, and by refusing to allow their moods and negative mental states to affect them, they apply the law of neutralization. The master, however, carries this to a much higher degree of proficiency, and by the use of his will, he attains a degree of poise and mental firmness almost impossible of belief on the part of those who allow themselves to be swung backward and forward by the mental pendulum of moods and feelings. The importance of this will be appreciated by any thinking person who realizes that creatures of moods, feelings, and emotion the majority of people are, and how little mastery of themselves they manifest. If you will stop and consider a moment, you will realize how much these swings of rhythm have affected you in your life. How a period of enthusiasm has been invariably followed by an opposite feeling and mood of depression. Likewise, your moods and periods of courage have been succeeded by equal moods of fear, and so it has ever been with the majority of persons. Tides of feelings have ever risen and fallen with them, but they have never suspected the cause or reason of the mental phenomena. An understanding of the workings of this principle will give one the key to the mastery of these rhythmic swings of feelings, and will enable him to know himself better and to avoid being carried away by these inflows and outflows. The will is superior to the conscious manifestation of this principle, although the principle itself can never be destroyed. We may escape its effects, but the principle operates nevertheless. The pendulum ever swings, although we may escape being carried along with it. There are other features of the operations of this principle, of which we speak at this point. There comes into its operations that which is known as the law of compensation. One of the definitions or meanings of the word compensate is to counterbalance, which is the sense in which the Hermeticists use the term. It is this law of compensation to which the Kybalion refers when it says, the measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. The law of compensation is that the swing in one direction determines the swing in the opposite direction, or to the opposite pole. The one balances or counterbalances the other. On the physical plane, we see many examples of this law. The pendulum of the clock swings a certain distance to the right and then an equal distance to the left. The seasons balance each other in the same way. The tides follow the same law. And the same law is manifested in all of the phenomena of rhythm. The pendulum with a short swing in one direction has but a short swing in the other, while the long swing in the right invariably means the long swing to the left. An object hurled up to a certain height has an equal distance to travel back on its return. The force with which a projectile is sent upward a mile is reproduced when the projectile returns to the earth on its return journey. This law is constant on the physical plane, as reference to the standard authorities will show you. But the Hermeticists carry it further. They teach that a man's mental states are subject to the same law. The man who enjoys keenly is subject to keen suffering, while he who feels but little pain is capable of feeling but little joy. The pig suffers but little mentally and enjoys very little. He is compensated. And on the other hand, there are other animals who enjoy keenly, but whose nervous organism and temperament cause them to suffer exquisite degrees of pain. And so it is with man. There are temperaments which permit of but low degrees of enjoyment and equally low degrees of suffering, while there are others which permit the most intense enjoyment, but also the most intense suffering. The rule is that the capacity for pain and pleasure in each individual are balanced. The law of compensation is in full operation here. But the Hermeticists go further. They teach that before one is able to enjoy a certain degree of pleasure, he must have swung as far proportionately towards the other pole of feeling. They hold, however, that the negative is precedent to the positive in this matter. That is to say, that in experiencing a certain degree of pleasure, it does not follow that he will have to pay up for it with a corresponding degree of pain. On the contrary, the pleasure is the rhythmic swing according to the law of compensation, for a degree of pain previously experienced either in the present life or in a previous incarnation. This throws a new light on the problem of pain, or the point of suffering. Why do we suffer? The Hermeticists regard the chain of lives as continuous and as forming a part of one life of the individual, so that in consequence the rhythmic swing is understood in this way, while it would be without meaning unless the truth of reincarnation is admitted. But the Hermeticists claim that the master or advanced student is able, to a great degree, to escape the swing towards pain by the process of neutralization aforementioned, by rising on to the higher plane of the ego. Much of the experience that comes to those dwelling on the lower planes is avoided and escaped. The law of compensation plays an important part in the lives of men and women. It will be noticed that one generally pays the price for anything he possesses or lacks. If he has one thing, he will lack another. The balance is struck. No one can keep his penny and have the bit of cake at the same time. Everything has its pleasant and unpleasant sides. The things that one gains are always paid for by the things that one loses. The rich possess much that the poor lack, while the poor often possess things that are beyond the reach of the rich. The millionaire may have the inclination towards feasting and the wealth wherewithin to secure all the dainties and luxuries of the table, while he lacks the appetite to enjoy the same. He envies the appetite and digestion of the laborer who lacks the wealth and inclination of the millionaire, and who gets more pleasure from his plain food than the millionaire could obtain even if his appetite were not jaded, nor his digestion ruined, for the wants, habits, and inclinations differ. And so it is through life. The law of compensation is ever in operation, striving to balance and counterbalance, and always succeeding in time, even though several lives may be required for the return swing of the pendulum of rhythm. And that, my friends, is the Kybalion, Hermetic Principle 5, Rhythm. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, my lodge, we do an educational night, not on a lodge night. We essentially meet in the lodge library, and we have discussions of things, usually involving something to do with Freemasonry, but often the discussion breaks into esoteric discussions. And we were discussing, I believe, Kabbalah. Someone had asked me a question. I don't remember what it is. But one of our officers drew something very poignant on the board, and it was a pendulum. And I don't have one here to illustrate, but if this line from point A to point B represents the pendulum, and the pendulum swings, we all understand what a pendulum is. If this line transcends both the higher plane and the lower plane, then we can see that the lower you sit on the lower plane here, the farther you will be affected by the pendulum swing. And if you can climb that string to get a little higher, then as the pendulum is swinging, you notice the top portion here, it doesn't swing as far. It's a very small movement. The higher you climb that string, the less movement you will suffer or be subjected to, as opposed to the wild swinging on the bottom, which is almost out of your control or seems to be out of your control. So that's a lesson that I learned. You want to climb, as the book mentioned, beyond your ego. You want to climb to the higher planes. And by climbing to the higher planes, you can kind of get around or get over the small stuff on the bottom that we make into bigger things. We make mountains out of molehills, as they say, as that saying goes. It also discusses, wrong word, as you go farther on the pendulum, it will return. And what does that mean? Well, if you're going through a really horrific time right now, you're just on the pendulum, and the pendulum will return back for you. That doesn't mean stop trying to climb the rope, but it means that it doesn't stay horrible forever. Nothing is forever. Now, sometimes we have to wait for the next life, and that's okay. And I know as stuck in this life as we are, that may seem like torture. You have to wait a whole lifetime, but then you look at a lifetime of a human is very, very small. It's a flash in the pan. So you learn your lessons now, and you take them forward into further lives. And the same is true. The more pain you cause other people, there is a neutralization. There's an evening of the scales, and you will pay for it. The pendulum will swing back on you. It always does. So keep those things in mind. As I'm moving towards my own progression, I will be elevated to the second degree this week. One of the lessons that Manly P. Hall teaches is that to be ready for the second degree, one must have learned to temper their emotions, their outbursts, to keep themselves at an even keel, to show kindness in the face of unkindness, to show temperance in the face of untempered behavior, and to show justice in the face of injustice. And I think that applies to this Hermetic lesson today. That to prepare for the second degree, if that is the path you're taking, you have to mind your emotional states. You have to learn how to take control over your emotional states. You have to climb the rope of that pendulum and escape the lower realms, the lower plane of the swing, because it is more intense and wildly varying as opposed to climbing into the upper. Thank you very much for listening. If you like what I have to say, please drop a like. It allows this message to get out. Why am I doing this message? Why am I spending time doing videos? Well, it is my honest opinion. It is my honest, firm belief that we are we have reached a point where the pendulum has started turning back, and it's turning back with a quickness. And hoarding knowledge and hiding one's light, I think, is not what we need to be doing. So I'm just providing my own insights to those people who are so inclined to be seeking themselves. So that is why I'm doing this. So if you like it, drop me a like. I appreciate it. I will also be providing a link to my Discord and to my the Desert Vikings Esoteric Wonderland Facebook group that I just created, because I like to discuss and have conversations. So if you are on either of those platforms and want to communicate, please feel free to jump on in and introduce yourself. I'd love to meet you virtually, as it were. Thanks, guys. Stay safe, and until next time, we will continue to delve into the Kabbalion and the Hermetic philosophies.